Hello and welcome to Karen's Creative Cards on YouTube. I am Karen Hashik, and in this video I am sharing some techniques and many card samples I made with a sadly neglected texture tool I own, and I bet you do too, embossing folders. I remember the first time I saw cardstock embossed with an embossing folder, and I was enchanted. I rushed out and bought a Cuttlebug machine and started collecting and using embossing folders on many of my cards. Through the years, I still add to my collection of embossing folders if I find a new, unique one, but I admit they are often sadly neglected. Embossing folders are very inexpensive and easily available and can be used to add simple texture to a background or in many other techniques, some of which I'm going to show you in this video. I had a play and created a dozen or so cards all featuring embossing folders, and I will show them all in this video. For more details on the ones I do not demo, click on the links to my blog posts in the description box. Here's a card I created with supplies from Cardstock for a guest DT spot later this week. I love using embossing folders on specialty papers such as this velvet from Elizabeth Crafts and this copper glossy paper. The embossing folder is by Craft Concepts and it is called Yves. It's spelled Y-V-E-S. And it's a really pretty floral one, and my husband, who knows French, said it's pronounced Yves. I embossed the serene bird die cut from Poppy Stamps so that the pattern follows from the background into the bird. And the bird and the friends was die cut out of this velvet sampler pack from Elizabeth Crafts. Making a quilt pattern on a card is so easy to do with embossing folders. I have this one from Doris, and you can see that it did most of the work for me, although I did cut them apart. But if you have 2 or 3 embossing folders and several colors of cardstock, you can cut your own. These squares are 1 1/4 inch squares, and they fit perfectly on an A2 card front. So I just cut those pieces and made a fun quilt card. One thing I love to do with embossing folders is to emboss the whole card base so the texture continues on all sides of the card. It is easy to do and so lovely. So this was a Doris embossing folder that had butterflies just on the side. So it allowed me to stamp the Thinking of You from Stempendous, and I added a couple butterflies, stitched butterflies, and then when you open it you have texture here and texture here, and you can write your greeting and sign it here, and then even on the back. I always put my notes on what I use on the back until I give it away. The big wishes, yeah, I think I told you everything I needed. Yep, that's from Stempendous, and those butterflies are from, I'm not sure. Anyway, that is one of my favorite cards that I made, and it's very, very simple and fast. I also did that on this Pet Sympathy card. I used another embossing folder from Doris, which are very easy to find and inexpensive, and that one had just dogs and paw prints around the edge, and I know it's subtle, I'm hoping you can see it, but I cut a piece of cardstock, I embossed those puppies and their paw prints, and then I continued that on the inside. So it's very subtle, but there's the little puppies and dog paw prints, and sometimes we do need sympathy cards for when someone loses a pet that is special to them. The stamps and all the stamps are from old ones from Stampin' Up! And Raisin Boat. This Crafter's Companion embossing folders is one of my favorite newer ones. It is 3D detailed and 3D, and for a more detailed embossing, it is a more detailed embossing folder. And I love to cut it out of dark brown cardstock, and then add Nouveau Indian Gold embellishment mousse to it after embossing. I die cut 3 rounded rectangles, and then I embossed. You always want to do the die cutting first, because if you do it after embossing, you will lose the raised embossing. I attached the biggest one first, and if you can see, for even more raising of it, I put some mounting tape under the second layer and pop-tops under the third, so it is very textured. The Mr. and Mrs. is from Honeybee Stamps for a lovely and very easy wedding card. After I die cut it out of the brown, I added some Nouveau embellishment mousse with a sponge that's totally dedicated to just that, and so rather than just dark brown, this highlighted the gold, and so that's another one of my favorite cards that I recently made. Here are 2 cards I made with Tim Holtz's Sizzix mesh embossing folder and a technique that I learned from Melissa Kerman that she calls Tarnished Foil. Melissa and I collaborated on videos and also on articles about the technique, which can look totally different every time depending on what inks or embossing folders or powders are used. I used heavy-duty aluminum foil for mine, and she uses Stampin' Up! Foil, which also results in very different looks. On my first card, I used green and black embossing powders and StazOn inks, and then attached a Spellbinders swirly die that was cut out of that velvet paper, and a sentiment from Stempendous. I think this technique makes great masculine cards. And here is the card that I'm going to demo today with that technique, and here are the supplies I used. I'm using a Tonic Studios On Your Day die. I'm using a Technique Tuesday set for the hat. This is the Tim Holtz Texture Fades mesh embossing folder that I got recently from Cardstock. I'm using some paper from Authentique that's called Curiousity, and it's two-sided. I'm sorry, it's not two. Yes, it is two-sided 6x6 paper. That's very cool. I don't want to lose any of these pieces here. Okay, so I cut a piece of cardstock 4 1/4 inches square, and then I cut a piece of heavy-duty aluminum foil just a bit bigger. I've tried this technique with regular aluminum foil, but it ripped, and I've not had that problem with the heavy-duty. I miter the edges, which means cutting, you know, a piece off every corner. And then I fold it and attach it to the back with regular tape. Then I take various colors of StazOn, and you can do this technique with just black, or just black and brown, but after I really fell in love with this technique, I went out and bought some of the smaller colored StazOns. So basically you just take the colors that you like and do some swiping, and that's kind of going to be in the background. So it's very, as much as you like or as little as you like. I am going to emboss this next. And I always put a piece of scratch paper over that StazOn before I run it through my machine. Now you don't have to, but that StazOn will definitely stain your embossing folder. Now you're going to swipe it with an embossing pad, and you could do that before and just put it all over, or you can do it after. And I'm going to do that after, and I'm going to emboss this now. Okay, my embossing is done. You can see how that swiping just now appears to be in the background. And then again, you can apply either the Versamark, or in this case I'm using the Nuvo Clear Mark embossing pad because it's juicier for me, directly to the embossing folder if you wish, but it kind of makes a mess. Or you can just put it on directly to the embossed aluminum foil. And then we're going to sprinkle on various colors, and again, this is totally optional. It can be done totally in golds and silvers if that's all you have. I just happen to have a really good selection of colored embossing powders from Nuvo. And it's just randomly wherever you like it on there, as much or as little. So that was a pretty blue, and this is what's called hot chocolate, so it's a brown. I left my door open and I'm hearing sounds out there. Normally I close it when I'm filming. Hope it's not disturbing you. Now, heat sealing that doesn't take too long, but rather than have you listen, I will do that off camera. So when that is done, that is what the background looks like. Now the last step that I like to do, again it's optional, is to tone down the rest of the aluminum foil with black StazOn. You could try another archival ink, but StazOn really works best on foil. And I just think it just tones down the aluminum foil a little bit so that you have a more masculine looking card. I am going to apply that piece with good strong ScorTape, just because other adhesives don't really work real well on that aluminum foil. And apply it to a card base that's already started with that pretty paper. The first time I made this card, I tried glue to attach this on your day, but then I had a brilliant idea, as sometimes happens, and I die cut it out a piece of cardstock over some ScorTape. And so it's very sticky, and it's going to stick very well even to this aluminum foil with the embossing powder and everything else on there. And then I die cut a hat, and I put it on a pop dot. And I thought this card would be perfect for a masculine card, or Father's Day, which we just had, any type of guy card, and that is the Tarnished Foil technique. The next technique I'm going to show you I learned many years ago, and it is how to create leather-like paper out of kraft cardstock using glycerin and distress inks. I have always used browns and just a touch of orange for the true leather look, which is how I learned how to do it. But as you can see in this example, it is pretty too, with peacock feathers and abandoned coral. I used an older Cuttlebug embossing folder and a Follow Your Heart die from Penny Black. And so if you can see, it looks like it's real leather. It's a very cool feel and look to that technique. This is the one that I'm going to be showing you how I made. You take a piece of thick kraft cardstock and you mix some glycerin, which you can find in any pharmacy or store that has this types of pharmacy items, and you mix it 4 to 1. So 4 parts water to 1 part glycerin. And I'm just using a dollar store sprayer. A couple lessons that I learned that I will share with you if you try this for the first time. You know, if you have extra here, I thought, well, I'll just save that for the next time I do this. Not going to want to do that, because mold was created almost within days, and I had to throw the bottle away because it was full of mold. Okay, so you're going to, I don't think I want this on here, I just want it on here. You're going to spray it, make sure it's liberally, and kind of work that in. And then do it again. And then you're going to wrinkle it all up. And then carefully open it up and do it again. Now you don't want it to tear, so when you're unwrinkling it, you know, be gentle. Soak some of that more up. Oh, it tore a little bit, didn't it? Okay. We're going to distress the edges anyway, so I'm going to say that's okay. I have a older wood grain embossing folder, but of course any embossing folder will work that you want to kind of look like leather. I don't have an embossing machine close to me, so once again I am going to have to turn this off, and I'll be back in a second. So I have embossed the piece, and then I heat set it till it dried, and that took a long time, so you didn't need to watch me doing that. I distressed the edges with a distressor to make it even more vintage looking, more distressed looking, and then I sponge on distressing. So now I showed you in the example, you can choose whatever colors you like. I like the vintage photo, and I especially like to get it darker around the edges where that has been distressed, and then to add color in the rest of it. Again, personal taste. You want to highlight that embossing, and it is really beginning to look like leather. And then for just a little bit of a pop of color someplace in it, you can add some spiced marmalade or another color. so it looks and feels just like very similar to leather. It is really a cool technique. I put it on a rust colored card base, and I added some feathers that I cut out with Spellbinder's die, and a hello from Stampendous for a nice masculine looking card. The last technique that I'm going to, the last tip, embossing folder tip I'm going to share with you, is great to do when you want to stamp in the middle of an embossed card front. There is a product available from Holtz and Sizzix called Embossing Diffusers, and I think there's 2 or 3 sets, and I have them linked in my description, and they are thick pieces of plastic, I guess, just the perfect height that would be like for a glass plate. So you replace one of your glass plates in your machine, and you'll want to check with your manufacturer with one of these, and it diffuses the embossing. So I have this set, and then I have another set, and you also get this piece too in the set. So if you actually wanted this piece, the oval or the square or whatever in the center, to be embossed and this piece not to be embossed, you can do that too. But I also wanted to share that years ago there wasn't diffusers on the market, and you can make your own. I did that years ago and wrote my first full-length article about that for Scrap and Stamp Arts back in 2009. And I recently found the ones that I made back then for that article with my original Spellbinder's Nestability dies. I made a card with them to show you that they do still work. So again, if you didn't want to buy the diffusers and you have some chipboard, you can make your own. This card I use the oval on, and I just diffuse the center here, again using that mesh Holtz embossing folder and some of that velvet paper that I showed before. You take 2 pieces or maybe 3 of chipboard and die cut the shape, whatever shape you want. I was using at that time my scalloped embossing and my scalloped dies from Spellbinder's Nestabilities, and you put them together. And I even had these showing that, you know, if you don't have chipboard, just use your cereal boxes. So, and then you glue 2 of them together. Back then I did 2 and it worked just fine. I guess maybe because now we know with the other ones that maybe a little bit thicker, you could maybe do 3. And again, I made that card with those homemade diffusers. The ones from Holtz are the perfect size to replace a glass in your Big Shot or other machine. It is placed over an embossing folder. You put your paper inside the embossing folder. I'm using a We Are Memory Keepers 3D one, and then you put the diffuser over it and run it through your machine, and it replaces one of the glasses. Okay, I like to tape it down. You don't have to, but that holds it in place. And as you can see, I've already done that. So this is when it comes out. It has diffused, and the center circle is not embossed. Before I did that, I stamped the I Really Like You from Lawn Fawn. I think this is a super cute die set and stamp set. And I die cut the little, what do you call that, wheel that they run around on. Then I did the stamping and the die cutting, and then I embossed it with a diffuser. Again, I'm using Lawn Fawn, I Really Like You stamp set and die. So I use the diffuser, and now I'm going to attach the gray wheel with tape in the back. Hamster wheel, right? Is that what it's called? Anyway, and then I'm going to attach some acetate. And I am going to create a well with some double-sided foam tip tape strips. As I'm going to make a shaker card. And what I cut off I can use in the corners. So that is all the same height. Just I am casing a card that I saw a fellow DT member at Doodle's Paper Pantry made, and when I saw this and she made it into a shaker card, I'm like, I have to have that set of dies and stamps, and I'm totally going to make it into a really cute shaker card. And I decided to use the embossing folder diffuser idea on it. Now I like to use a little bit of powder along the sticky edges to make sure that the sequins do not stick. I used some bright sequins in this one, and I was almost out, so I have mixed two sparkle blend mixes, the Crown Jewels and the Cotton Candy, to come up with a fun sequin mix for this shaker card. Now this is just a sample pack. If you do purchase them from Sparkle Blends, and I'll put the link in the description, you get a much bigger one. Because I'm on the design team, I get sample packs of them. When I want to line up a piece that is the same size as the card front, and when I'm doing shaker cards, I like to do that. I learned a trick years ago that you put it in the corner of your Score Pal or Score Buddy or whatever that you have, and then make sure that where the fold is perfectly straight. If the other ones are not, you'll be okay because you can trim it off. But if the folded side shows white, then you can't cut it off. So that is a tip that I will share and have shared before because I do it all the time. Try to get those away from the stickiness. And so this is my card front, and I am going to try to line up the top. Press down. And our shaker card is good. I can trim a little bit off that side because that side's not the fold. I have the little hamster cut out and stamped, and I'm going to put him on here. And the one last thing that I decided to do, and I kind of forgot about, was you can see the embossing on there, but I decided that it stood out better if I just sponged it a little bit, and so I just added a little bit of black to that embossing just to highlight it. And again, that's a personal choice depending on what type of embossing folder you're using or who it's for. But I thought it added a nice, it made that embossing stand out just a bit more. Do you have embossing folders that are sadly neglected and need a little love in your crafty stash too? I hope this video inspires you to try some embossing on your cards, either as a simple background or using one of the techniques and tips I shared. I would love for you to share if you have any cards you make after watching this video. I have some Pinterest pin links in my description box for you to leave a comment on, with a link or a picture of one or two cards you have made. Thanks for watching, sharing, subscribing, and commenting, and helping me share the joy of creativity.